Today, we are learning basketball with Es Baraheni, Toronto native covering the Toronto Raptors at Raptors Republic, NBA coverage at Forbes, Bleacher Report, ProHoopsWriters, Sportscasting, and formerly The Score, Sideline reporting at the CEBL, and the newly announced co-host of NBA Daily with The Athletic. Congrats,
Yeah.
man. How you doing today, Ez?
Man, it's been a whirlwind of a day. I'm not gonna lie, but excited to be on here and talking hoops and talking Raptors with you, man. RK, I know it's been a little bit since we kicked it in Vegas, but it's good to catch up, man.
You already know. It was great meeting out there. And yeah, I
Yes,
don't
sir.
think we've done a pod since maybe like a Jalen Suggs type of development
Yeah,
pod, I want to say, is last time
which
we
we
talked. So,
nailed, by the way.
we
We
killed it.
nailed. Yeah, yeah,
Hey,
yeah.
that's why the listeners are coming back. You know, they want to hear more about
Yes, sir.
Suggs and Scottie getting it
Yeah.
right. But I definitely want to talk to you a little bit more about them later on. But before we break into the NBA aspect, I just wanted to kind of get a little background on your career and what led you down this path, and what do you look for when you're scouting and thinking of stories? Like what kind of process do you go through when you're preparing these projects now in all different forms?
Yeah. Well, first of all, like I appreciate you asking that question because it's changed a lot. I obviously came into this just being like, all right, how am I going to just like get into sports media and by any means necessary and like figure out how I can like do anything I can possibly do, whether it be like writing or video or anything, right? And kind of podcasting has kind of been dropped on me as this thing that I thought maybe I could do a little bit of, but now obviously it's a big part of my work too. And so I just enjoy storytelling. And one of my favorite types of storytelling is sort of like the hero's journey of like figuring it out. Because I think it's a big part of life, and it's something that we see in sports that we can relate to the most, which is like one getting over a hurdle, but also improving and like figuring out a certain aspect of yourself. And I think that's a really interesting, I guess, discovery point I have when it comes to watching these players like figure things out on the court and develop. So that's why I lean towards figuring out one, how a player will develop, how they can improve, and then you kind of watching them throughout that process over their, 6, 7, 8, 10, whatever year career. I think that's the most fruitful part of this stuff. So whatever I try to do in my coverage, I like to tell stories, and a lot of those stories are about getting to that point in your career. And yeah, I don't know. I guess that's the way I would word it.
No doubt. I mean, there's a lot of exciting prospects in Toronto now, so you're getting to
Yeah.
live that journey with a Scottie Barnes or even a Gradey Dick, who seems to have taken another leap up there as well. So I'm excited to dig into those guys as
Yeah.
well. But before we do, we got to say it's Vinsanity Day here on the Learning Basketball Pod. He just enters the Hall of Fame. You can see we're rocking the dunk contest shirt. He stays
You're more
repping.
decked out than
Try
I
to
am.
get it.
I
You already
wish.
know. I came
Yeah.
ready. We got T Mac and Vince always repping in the back, as they
Yeah.
do. So they're fan favorites here in Orlando as well, even though
Of
they
course.
started off in Toronto together. And
Hmm.
just to celebrate Vince a little bit, he obviously got to play with his cousin T Mac in Toronto.
Yeah.
Was the 1999 Rookie of the Year, 2000 dunk contest champion, 8-time All-Star, already getting his jersey retired by 2 teams, maybe a third with Orlando one day. He had his dream come true playing for his hometown team in Orlando on those famous Dwight teams. And, even considered the best dunker ever. Even if you ask Dr. J himself, he puts him on the Mount Rushmore of Dr. J, Vince, Dominique, and MJ. So,
Yep.
we know Vince is just an icon in Toronto basketball. And I guess, you had a great video recently that tried to summarize the highs and lows, especially involving the fans' perspective. And
Yeah.
that's just, you had a great, thought with quoting the Chris Bosh quote about love and hate, where it's a fine line,
Very
because
much so.
it really, defines fandom. Because T Mac went through the same thing. Like whenever there's a bad breakup from a great player, the
Yep.
fans want the guy around forever, and they want him to want to be here forever. And when it doesn't work out, you're going to get a lot of fans that choose a nasty route and try to be mean. And that's kind of how fandom can be. It can get a little disgusting at times, but
Yeah.
At the end of the day, time heals all wounds, and these are the greatest players to play for your franchise. So whether they won it all with your team or not, they're still the ones that put it on the map, that rep the city, that make the purple Raptors jersey with the dinosaur iconic, and the
Right.
Orlando with the pinstripes iconic.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
what would you say Vince means to the city of Toronto today?
Yeah, I mean, they went through the whole cycle of fandom with Vince, right? And of course, it took 20 plus years to do that. I think nowadays we go through that cycle much quicker, right? So there's that young darling team or young darling superstar that people fall in love with, and then you can think of like the Anthony Edwards and John Morants of the world, and then like expectations hit them like crazy. It's like, okay, can Anthony Edwards be the next face of the league? Can John Morant be the next face of the league? And maybe the way they deal with it when they're young doesn't necessarily translate or bode well for their whatever personality, if you will. And so I think it ends up being this really, really quick cycle where you go from like being on the mountaintop to, okay, these expectations now put you down. And there are fans that will actually hate on you for not reaching those expectations, whether they be incredibly like tough expectations to uphold, or they're just like ridiculous standards to hold any athlete to, especially young athletes. So we go through this cycle very, very quickly now compared to what we did with Vince Carter or Tracy McGrady when we were, 20 years ago, because social media has heightened this so much more. But now you look at it and you look at what they went through with Vince, where it's like there was 10 years of like hatred between Toronto and Vince, and it was booze. You can go back to his first game coming back, the revenge games, and like the alley-oop dunk that he had in New Jersey. And I remember he even had like this dunk play that he had when he was on the Mavericks, and he kind of did the crying tear, kind of celebration afterwards. And like I think you go through the motions of that and you come back understanding that everybody made mistakes when it came to that. You think of the Raptors organization and some of the decisions that they made around Vince at the time, whether it be trades that they made or coaching decisions or not listening to their star. Like there were a lot of things that they missed out on, as Vince also messed up on certain things too, and he's even admitted it too. So it's like we had to go through this process through 20 years. And now there's this celebration of Vince Carter. Some people still hold a grudge. I mean, even in that video that I made, in the comment section, there's still people being like, nah, I don't want to, embrace Vince Carter. He did this, he did that. And like that, I guess that's a fine opinion to have, but at some point you have to move on, because you're not only moving on from like hatred of Vince and whatnot, but you're also moving on from what the Raptors were for the last 30 years, which is this kind of like startup type of not even mom and pop. I can't call an NBA organization mom and pop, but they were this startup franchise in a place that was not expected to blow up basketball wise. And this guy helped put it on the map, make it what it is, popularize basketball across not only Toronto, but the country. And you see all these NBA players now developing from Canada. A part of that is because of Vince Carter. And so like it's tough to come to grips with that and come to grips with how it ended and not feel like you're moving on into something different now with the Raptors organization. And I'm sure we're going to talk about that now, but like it's just a different Raptors team and organization and franchise than it was in 1998 when Vince Carter came. And so that process, a lot of it has to do with the path that Vince created back there. So
it sounds real familiar. I mean, Orlando went through a lot of similarities coming into the league 1989, and you get the same type of response from all the best players. You got Shaq, who came and went.
Yeah.
Penny had those injuries at the end, ended up leaving as well because of that and getting traded. And Dwight came and went, and these guys kind of like ended up asking out or just flat out leaving, along with T-Mac as mentioned. So a lot of the fans, you can go down one of two paths. You can either hate everybody because everybody ends up leaving eventually and doesn't deliver the championship, So they're not good enough. They didn't follow through on the promise. Or you can enjoy the best players to ever walk through the doors that you actually made basketball fun to watch in your city,
Right.
give you good games and at least a chance to, whether it's win it all or just enjoy some basketball on an afternoon or at night every once in a while after work. These are the guys that did it. So, we look back, we celebrate them. They are, like you said, the ones that put it on the map. And then both teams are, putting together a nice collection of young talent here to build towards the future. And yeah, we can jump right into these new teams. Speaking of the purple jerseys, they're back. No dinosaur
They're
this time,
back.
but they're back.
I have the RJ Barrett version in my closet right now, right here. Like
Oh,
it looks exactly like the one that you have on your shirt and the posters in the back. It's beautiful. I love the purple. Purple's a hard color to mess up, in my opinion, especially when it comes to jerseys. And so it just works well. I hope they end up sticking with it even after this season, because I know it's more of a celebratory, like, hey, let's look at the past and embrace it type of thing. But I hope they stick with it moving forward too.
Yeah, it's iconic, and Orlando did something similar last year. I want to say it was with the blue pinstripes from the '90s.
Yes,
and it's everyone's favorite jerseys. Like just keep they make it like a once in a while throwback. It's like, no, these are the ones we want to see every night.
People like,
So,
they're
gonna sell, and they're gonna look good.
Like the Celtics rarely, if ever, change their jersey because the green is so iconic, and it's like they understand that, right? The Lakers very rarely, they'll do like city editions, and they changed how the hue of the yellow is compared to what it was before. But like Lakers very rarely change their jersey colors because they know like people like the color scheme of that. You just don't change it. We don't need an orange Orlando jersey. We don't need that. We need the blue pinstripe. We need the blue pinstripe,
so
please.
hard, man. There were so many orange ones, and each one was like worse than the last. It felt like, but it's like they're trying to make us like a Halloween team. Like if we were gonna involve orange, like they should have went with the name Orlando Juice as the name. That was a possibility in the early days. We didn't go with it.
Oh, that's cool.
So
I didn't know that. That's cool.
It's a fun fact. It makes sense because, citrus, orange juice, that kind of thing really runs in Orlando, so it could have worked. It's a cool name. It can also mean like, strength or
you got the juice.
You got the juice. So I appreciate the possibility. It would have been a fun alternate path. But we didn't do that.
Although I can understand why in the 80s they decided not to go with juice because, like, there's the connotation there.
Everywhere back then. Yeah. So, I mean, it makes sense, the negative connotation around that. But, we didn't go with it. Maybe involve a little orange on the normal jerseys, but, just going all this orange, it looks like Halloween night every time they wear the jersey. It doesn't work, Nike. Like, stick to the classics,
Please. Yeah.
So, Scottie Barnes is popping onto the scene. Rookie of the year, top 5 pick. I loved him at Florida State. I think he's, I'm as high as anyone can be on Scottie Barnes. Going back to that far, where watching him get game-winning Euro step dunks and just like a north-south downhill force all the way back to college. I mean, like my first thought was the Giannis comp way back then as his like potential ceiling without, throwing hyperbole around, just like the type of player, that type of archetype as a point forward, huge, strong, barreling downhill north-south force with good ball handling and good vision. And like the jumper was always a questionable factor in that development. And same as for a lot of big guys that can handle but maybe can't shoot. So, when like any of them, if the pull up is hitting, it's just an unguardable player at this level. And you and Samson Folk as well have had some great work with Raptors Republic, kind of outlining a lot of the development he's had. Samson just put up this video noting some of the pick and roll development for Scottie, where he's jumped from 0.9 pick and roll PPP to 1.05. And including passes is in the 80th percentile as a pick and roll creator, just thriving against like different defenses like ice traps and rejecting screens. And you noted this huge, he just threw down this huge poster slam the other day where he's like
Yeah.
running a double drag, I think, and like Euro stepping
Yep.
through the paint, and then just like one step in front of the line just decides to take off. So that's really the first question: is what's higher, how high he got on that dunk, or his potential ceiling in this league?
Oh man, he did get high on that dunk, but it was more about the extension that was bizarre to me because
Yeah, it was like
I
a
talked
Michael
about it.
Jordan Space Jam type of
Yeah,
arm
yeah, yeah.
extension.
You mentioned the Giannis thing. Like there really is only a few guys in the league who could do a move like that. Being the ball handler, and yeah, the play is a double drag or 77 shallow, where the second screener will empty out the paint, and it's usually a shooter as the second screener. I believe it was Emmanuel Quickly at that time who kind of popped out, spaced the floor, so the help can't actually pinch in. The help has to go to the corner, and so at that point, just like a clear lane for Scottie to attack. And that's the bread and butter of what the Raptors are trying to run offensively for a guy like Scottie Barnes. You mentioned Sampson's piece, which I think was really, really well done, and it opened up like how he's activating some of his offensive skill sets through his passing, like just unlocking different levels of what he can do in the pick and roll through his ability, like utilizing the passing as a weapon to open up things for himself offensively. I just, man, in terms of like the ceiling question, it every I have to kind of temper my expectations sometimes because I look at, we go back to like the whole star thing. His ceiling has no bounds. Like I'm not sure necessarily what he will end up being at 27, 28 years old. Obviously there's the shooting stuff where you mentioned, and like how that falls through in the next couple of years and what ends up happening. That'll probably determine his ceiling to some extent. But I think ultimately one of the things that I'm looking forward to the most is like how he can weaponize his post up, which is I think what Darko Rajakovic and the Raptors are trying to do more this season, especially with the floor spacing that they have around him, with a Gradey Dick, with an Emmanuel Quickly, weaponizing the post up, being able to draw to two. You talked about the strength. He's such a strong player that they often try to get mismatches early for him to attack in the post. And so at that point, the team, the defense has to send a double, and that ends up opening an opportunity. He's such a great floor general and passer that he can oversee that and make the play, make the skip pass, make that pass to the shooter, and the offense kind of gets churning that way. I'm excited. I have no idea what his ceiling is, to be honest with you, because now he's getting in consideration for, like, I think if he contractually he has a chance to become an all NBA type player and then like, make, I think 50, 60,000, not thousand, 50, 60 million dollars more. Yeah, a couple zeros onto that. 50, 60 million dollars more if he makes all NBA this season. So I think that's a focus for him, is like getting to that echelon of player. Will he do that this season? Who knows? But he's definitely in that trajectory for sure.
Hey, the ceiling is the roof, as MJ once said.
Yeah,
I mean, there's
yeah,
there's no limits here, and that's really interesting. I mean, because I could definitely see how that incredible vision, playmaking, seeing above the defense and able to read with all that spacing, how the post up could really be the next level, the next weapon for him as a growth. So like improving that
yeah,
post up back down scoring to really become like a shot creation hub down there would be really interesting to see. I could see how that could just help him take off to another level, especially getting those playmaking numbers up. And speaking of some of the floor spacing, I mean, Gradey Dick has just been
yeah,
insane. Like he's clearly much more than a standstill shooter. Like this guy is a
yeah,
motion shooter who is a relocating like no other. He's just creating advantages for his teammates by constantly moving around the court and opening the floor up with that gravity, even pulling up for some mid range, stepping into some mid range pull ups. Like
yeah.
clearly just more than a shooter. So that leads me to the question: who do you view as more of like a vital long term piece next to Scottie, and also kind of reliable scoring option even this season between Gradey Dick, Emmanuel Quickly, and RJ Barrett, some of the top scorers
Yeah,
around the team?
I'm very. That's probably the main question I have for this season, is like which other player will pop next to Scottie, because we sort of know that Scottie is moving along, and like, again, based on some of these swing factors, he'll land somewhere between, a top 10 to top 15, 20 player eventually, right? Like I do believe that that is the type of caliber player he will eventually be. In terms of the other guys, that's the main question I have. It's like, can you find the second fiddle for Scottie Barnes to build with? They obviously believe Emmanuel Quickly is going to be that guy. They just signed him to an extension that gives him $35 million a year over the next 5 years. The passing and playmaking that IQ displayed last year in the pick and roll, even in the 30 some games that he played, it grew and it got better as he continued to play and as he got saw more coverages, whether it was teams like trapping him and forcing him to kind of make the pass over top, or if a team was going to like ice the situation and see how he was going to react to that. Like I think there were certain pick and roll coverages that he struggled with versus some that he excelled in. He, like Scottie, is great at rejecting screens and getting downhill. And so settling into that floater is something that's really important for him, and getting that mid-range bag down is going to be essential for his growth. I would say that the shooters, though, I think Quickly and Gradey are the two guys that I'm focused on. I think RJ is prepared to have a really great season, but I am sort of questioning what the fit will look like there long term between him and Scottie. That being said, like if RJ, who shot 40% on threes last year as a Raptor, if he continues to shoot 40% on threes and he's doing it on like decent volume and he's finishing at the rim efficiently like he was last year for Toronto, and if he puts up the same numbers that he did in the 30 odd some games that he had with the Raptors, then the conversation might change. But I think from a pure fit perspective, you got to lean on Gradey and you got to lean on IQ as the long-term fits. I think with Gradey, one of the more interesting things, you talked about the shooting and just like he's so much more than a shooter and just like this spot up guy. I think the one thing that forced him to get to that was developing his cardio. Like that was a big part of his rookie year. People underrate how much cardiovascular endurance you need to run up and down, and not just run up and down, but like constantly move like Gradey Dick needs to in order to open up his shots. So that was a big learning curve for him. And now that he has his legs under him physically, you're seeing so much of it pop more. So I'm excited, man. I really don't know he's also another guy where it's like, how much more can he take this? Like what other level is there to his game? Because it feels like there's more untapped potential there than what maybe meets the eye.
Yeah, I mean, if that shooting takes off, it's looking like more than a six man, and maybe even like a second or third scoring option next to Scottie. And it's the right answer, because like just relocating shooters is a natural fit off of Scottie Barnes' playmaking. Like he needs floor spacers as much as they need him, and they just make each other better by having them out there. And like great point on kind of his reconditioning and just the idea that relocation conditioning is just an insane skill in itself that is almost right involved with shooting, that you can't have one without the other, especially if you want to be trying to get open all game long. So bouncing around some of the other guys on the team, you had this nice piece on Jakob Poeltl as kind of a playmaking hub. And what's his long-term future like? Do you think he is a trade candidate because of where the team's at, or is he here to stay as kind of like a nice playmaking hub down low for the squad?
Yeah, I would love to see what the answer to that question is in February, and that probably depends on the record that the team has. To be honest with you, like if they're playing and flirting with the play-in spot, then I think they probably keep him, and if they're not and they're kind of nosediving, then I would imagine they address him by a trade. I also think like Jakob is essential to the system that the Raptors play offensively. So many high post actions where it's either him or Kelly Olynyk or Scottie Barnes sort of overseeing and watching guys cut by them and like making those reads over the top of the defense. It's such a important and integral part of the Raptors offensive system. So Jakob fits so well with what they want to achieve on the offensive end that I would imagine a guy like Darko Rajakovic actually wants to hold on to a guy like him, because he fits everything they want to do. And so I wouldn't be surprised if they end up trading him, because I think there are a few teams in the NBA who would want an NBA center. The Knicks have a bunch of issues injury wise with their starting centers and whatnot. The Pelicans need a starting center. The Lakers are looking to add size. Like there are some places especially playoff teams that need a big man. And so if the Raptors can capitalize on that, I could see that being something that they do. But that being said, I think he just makes so much sense not long term, but in the medium term of this team to be just a developmental guy to help some of these guys because he's such a good screener and that helps create openings for Emmanuel quickly or, sealing driving lanes off for a guy like RJ Barrett or, finding a guy like Scottie Barnes and Gradey Dick on cuts. Like he does all of these things so well that it sort of makes it tough for me to envision anybody else stepping in there and doing some of the things that Jakob does, and doing it to the point like you kind of need those guys when you're in a rebuild to develop, right? And I think Houston saw that last year when they got Fred VanVleet and they saw Alperen Şengün's numbers kind of skyrocket because he finally had a table-setting point guard. I think Dylan Brooks really helped Şengün on the defensive end, and so like just having that base level of competency really helps with a team that's trying to develop. And now you see Şengün obviously getting mentioned in like all-star conversations and whatnot. Like you need that. I actually think in a similar sense for Orlando, like I think KCP might end up being that for you guys in the sense that like he's going to alleviate some of the playmaking pressure off of Suggs and Paolo. He's going to alleviate some of the point of attack defense stuff off of those guys too. And like it's just going to be those glue guys that are essential to a team that's trying to take that next step in their life cycle, whatever it is.
Right. You don't want to just be the rebuilding team that goes all youth projects with every player on the roster. You need, like you said, some guys to kind of set the tone, show what it's like to just be a competent NBA player that shows up and does the job well. And the fact that he makes life a little easier on the court for everybody with his passing just really, really helps everybody out there. So, and I forgot to mention, I mean, they invested in him or at least invested to get him. I mean, sending out a first round pick in their situation at the time is not an overpay, but like kind of not very ordinary move if you're not trying to win now. So clearly they value him enough to give out a first round pick. So maybe if the season is trending down, they try to recoup that pick at the deadline. But otherwise, I mean, it makes sense that he's here to stay for at least help grow this rebuild into the next stages. And so how do you see the season going at the moment? Like, do you think it's bound for the lottery, or is this team gonna challenge for the play-in at least?
Yeah, I think there are going to be some teams in the Eastern Conference that just fall into the playing game. Somebody has to play that game, essentially. You know what I mean? And I think, you look at Brooklyn and Washington who have chosen already, like we're not really interested in winning this year. Chicago has a top 10 protected pick this year. So I imagine that they also eventually will be like, well, we're not interested in really going for that playing game. Charlotte has a lottery protected pick as well. And so I think maybe they will be competitive. Clearly they have the roster to be competitive. I'm pretty high on what the Hornets can do this season, but maybe inevitably they'll decide, okay, let's move to not focusing on the play-in as much. And so that leaves Detroit, which I think is highly incentivized to try and be as competitive as possible this year. They've just been through that lottery way too many times, and like they have their prospects. Let's just see how good they can possibly be. I think Detroit is the least incentivized team of all to really push and like tank, right? So Detroit will be in that conversation, I believe. And then the other team is Toronto. And so I think Toronto might be in a position where, Masai Ujiri mentioned at the press conference, like the first word he said was rebuild. He's like, we're rebuilding. And so when a team sets that expectation early, I think it means that they want to, like, if it gets to the point where they're near a play-in spot, but maybe they're 3 or 4 games back from being the third worst team in the Eastern Conference, I think they would opt to sell and be a team that like prioritizes getting a few more lottery balls to kind of make sure that they're in position to get a high lottery pick, especially with the 2025 draft looking like it is.
Yeah, you mentioned the draft. Are there any prospects that have been circling in Raptors Twitter or draft circles that kind of stand out as potential targets? Obviously, someone is going to win that Cooper Flag lottery, but
Right.
is there any
Yeah.
players that you would hope to see maybe fit with a Scottie Barnes and some of the other guys?
Yeah, I think the two guys that pop out to me, obviously outside of of Cooper Flag, because like that's the main prize in this draft.
Right.
You know what I mean? I think the two guys are probably the guards that are being mentioned in the top five, and Dylan Harper and Nolan Traore. I
Mm.
just think like two guys who can create off the
Mm.
bounce, who can get downhill. Obviously, I'm not sure like with the Emmanuel Quickly there and Gradey Dick there, how that all would work defensively. But that being said, like it seems like Harper will end up being a plus defender in the NBA. It obviously seems like Nolan Traore will be a pretty good defender in the NBA too. So like fit wise, I think it would make sense. Yeah, those are the two guys that I'm kind of looking at because I think this team needs some extra guard play, especially in terms of like just alleviating some of the playmaking pressure off of Scottie.
Yeah, and I've caught a few of the more recent games of Traore, so I've kind of seen, I guess, a lot of the good, the positive of what he
Yeah,
could be. He has a little bit of fitting that Fred VanVleet role of the rule, I should say, where if you're going to be a small guard in the NBA, you better be a hound on defense and
right.
drill those pull up threes or at least be able to space the floor in some capacity. And his
Yeah,
vision, his playmaking vision, is something that really impresses. So you could definitely, if that 3-pointer holds for Nolan Traore, you could
that's a
see
big
him
question. Yeah,
being something of like a defensive playmaker with great footwork and fundamentals on that end, who also can be at least a connector, and that works really well off Scottie since Scottie brings such a strong playmaking force. Then that kind of alleviates both of them from not having to create every single play every single time down. So that's
yeah.
definitely a fun name to watch out for Raptors fans. So who is the most important role guy this year? You got Davion Mitchell, who's just a hound on defense now here.
Yeah.
Ochai Agbaji, impressive prospect. Chris Boucher and Bruce Brown, they bring some good defense as well. And then Jonathan Mogbo, the rookie. I mean, he's has some versatile defense for himself. Kind of an interesting player who you even, I think, compared to Bruce Brown maybe on Twitter a little, where he can be like a smaller, undersized big man with some connector vision and uses his long wingspan and strength on the
Yeah.
perimeter to kind of be a versatile defender, quick leaper, dunker, finisher at the rim, great rebounder, short roll passer. Shout out to Ahmed Jama and Matt Powers for being super high on him in the draft.
Oh
So,
yeah. Yeah.
is he the most important role guy as a rookie to see how he fits, or is it one of these other names that just kind of start out higher in the rotation?
Yeah, I would probably say it's one of the guys higher up. I'm a big Mobo fan, and I think like he has a big chance to pop eventually. I do think he will need some 905 time to just get acclimated to the speed of the game. It in the first little 5 games that we've seen him play, it feels like he knows what he wants to do, but the speed of the game is a little bit faster than what he's trying to track out. So like getting those reps and ironing them out in the G League will be really important for him. I think he will be eventually a really good player though. And in terms of who might be the most important this year, I think it has to be Davion Mitchell. He is on his he's getting sort of his last, maybe second last opportunity in the NBA now in Toronto. It's a contract year for him, so he has to do what he needs to here. And so there's a bit of pressure for him to excel in the role that the Raptors are giving him, which is that 6-man role. Like he's going to be the backup point guard for the team. He's going to be asked to orchestrate and set up their offense for their bench and their second units. But I also see him stepping in and closing some lineups with the Raptors. So he could pair well really nice next to Emmanuel Quickly and Gradey Dick. Just this stout point of attack defender who can kind of guard the best player. He's good at guarding up too. So if there's a guy that's dominating them, maybe like a Devin Booker type or whatever, they can throw Davion on there so that, other guys don't necessarily have to compensate on the defensive end. I think he's a big part of what this season's team can be. And so he's the one guy I would say is really important. But who knows? Maybe Jamal Shed jumps into the rotation ahead of him too, because Jamal has been really impressive and does some of the same things that Davion does.
Yeah, keep an eye on Shed because Davion is a huge, like you said, just huge impact as a point of attack defender. He came out the gates that way as a rookie. I remember there was a
Yeah,
conversation between even him and Suggs, just between who was the better rookie defender, and they were both
yeah,
just super impressive right out of the gates. So One last thing I should have asked a little earlier on the Raptors is: are there any plays, action sets that you really like Darko implementing, or you're excited to
Mhm.
see this year, or is it simply Scottie Barnes pick and roll variations or post ups?
Yeah, the pick and roll variations I think we touched on, like the double drag stuff, is really interesting, and how he reacts to that, like screen, like rejecting the screen. We kind of talked about the pick and roll stuff that he does, which is really impressive, and I'm curious to see how much more they do of that. One thing I would mention is just like regular old flex actions that they run between Scotty IQ and Jakob Poeltl, where IQ will set the rip screen or whatnot, and then he'll pop out to get the ball above the break. Then they can run into like a pick and roll with him and Jakob Poeltl, and it sort of flows. It's this flow action that the Nuggets have popularized. Obviously, they run that a ton with Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic, but they do something similar in Toronto with Scotty and IQ. Unfortunately, we only got to see like 3 games of it, 5 games of it with just them playing it. So I'm interested to see how much more they run it this season. I like the fact that they're weaponizing IQ off of the ball in that action more often. When they have Scotty as the ball handler and IQ setting the screen and kind of popping out afterwards. That's the one question I have. I mean, it's not really a question, but it's an action that I'm looking forward to. Yeah, I think that's the one. That's the one I'm looking forward to the most.
No doubt, we'll be looking out for that. I mean, the Raptors seem at the very least like a fun League Pass team this year. Like I just caught
Yeah,
their
yeah.
preseason game against Boston, and they're just lighting up the floor. I mean, maybe they were just hitting their shots this one, but it seems like they've
They
improved
were
their
cooking.
spacing. I mean, they
They-
were just hitting everything.
yeah,
Gradey Dick was taking the leap right in that moment for the rest of the
yeah,
time. So I
yeah,
mean, if they're going to be running and gunning, hitting threes around Scottie Barnes, and also playing tough defense with plenty of personnel to execute it, that's a fun team to watch. So
yeah,
and you outlined they really could challenge for the play-in for all those reasons. I mean, they might be in a group of 4 or 5 that are near the play-in, but if all those other teams have picks to worry about that are prioritizing with the protections, then you could really see them make an effort. So can't wait to
yeah,
watch the Raptors here. Maybe we run through some of what you've been writing lately with sportscasting.
yeah.
The Wizards, who do you think the most enticing prospect will be to build around? I would think it's Bilal Coulibaly as kind of this
Yeah.
like lengthy, smart defensive playmaker. But Alex Sarr might be the most impressive defensive prospect in that entire draft. They have Corey
Yep.
Kispert, knockdown 3-point shooter. They have Bub Carrington, kind of a walking bucket, fun
Mhm.
player as well. So who do you like the most on this young Wizards roster?
Yeah, I'm intrigued by what they're building in the sense that they're trying to figure out some sort of identity defensively first. And so with Bilal and Alex Sarr, like imagine if Cooper Flag plays with those two.
Mm.
The defense that they can create. I mean, that just it sounds incredible when you think of it. So I think I think that's the thing I'm looking forward to this season with the Wizards. It's like, okay, they were obviously not a good defensive team last year. Can they find some sort of baseline competency this year between Bilal and Sarr and Corey Kispert, and like, can they just find a level of like good on defensive end that they can get to? I doubt they will, to be honest with you. This is a team that's like obviously not going to win a lot of games. It's going to be tough for them to focus on the defensive end, especially when you have guys like Jordan Poole like trying to defend at the point of attack. It's going to be tough. That being said, I think Bilal is the guy for me too. I love that they just kind of give him the green light to figure out things offensively also, because you don't know what his ceiling really can be offensively. He's got some on ball juice. He's pretty interesting as an off ball guy, like catch and shoot type player. But I'm intrigued by like what he can do more. So let's see what happens.
For sure, and he just had some great experience overseas. He got to play in, I want to say, the gold medal and silver medal, or
Yep.
the last 2 games at least, I should say, in the
Hmm.
Olympics. And he was just kind of thrown in there by the coaches, playing around with some lineups, trying to go a little smaller and a little more versatile. And he's clearly got some impressive skills as a ball handler, his vision, and a really strong defender. So they have some really young defensive pieces, but like you
Yep.
said, that team defense might not come around until the rest of the roster is kind of filled out. So their best prospect might just be whoever they get in this draft coming up in a few months. But
You're probably right. Yeah.
that's a big if. But jumping around to the Hornets, how dynamic do you think LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller's offense can be? Are they going to mesh, or is it going to be a little my turn, your turn, and or is Trey Mann just going to step in and
Yeah, yeah,
be given the ball? Maybe LaMelo's dealt with a lot of injuries, so maybe Trey Mann pops with a little more opportunity. Like who excites
yeah.
you most about the Hornets, and do you think this team is going to work together?
I actually do. From what we've seen in the preseason, I think there's a pretty interesting blend between LaMelo and Brandon Miller. Watch their game against the Knicks, and you saw LaMelo being used more as a screener. So on ball, pick and roll, inverted pick and roll, and you have like LaMelo popping out to the 3-point line. He's a pretty good catch and shoot 3-point shooter. So like that aspect I think is really intriguing. It also allows Brandon Miller to focus on the playmaking and like pick and roll craft that he can work on and develop. And so I'm pretty high on the Hornets. I think they've become sort of like the media darling right now, where everybody's like, "Hey, what about the Hornets? Like, what do you think the Hornets could do?" And so I don't know. I think like the East is tough to crack. Especially the top 6 of the East is pretty tough to crack. I don't see them getting to that point, but like there is a world in which they win like 42, 44 games. They've already done that with LaMelo Ball before. Adding a Brandon Miller, Mark Williams, hopefully he stays healthy. I'm intrigued by their rookie Tajon Salon. You mentioned Trey Mann, like that. Adding Josh Green, who's just like a competent guard that can defend at the point of attack. Also, big fan of competency in general. So like, I don't know. I think they have a pretty intriguing roster. Like maybe this is the team that gets from, hey, we have to tank this year and suck, to no, we have our core figured out. We should be okay.
Right. Yeah. Before you mentioned the lottery pick kind of protections for that team that might end up dictating their season, I honestly thought they would be in that play-in race. Like a healthy
Yeah,
LaMelo is a star player in this league. Brandon Miller really
totally.
emerged last year as a clear type of scorer, and that's a really interesting set you mentioned because I really love LaMelo Ball's handoffs and his catch and shoot game, playing off the
Hmm.
ball almost as similar to his brother, the Ball brothers. Both have a little bit of that
Yep.
connector, that catch and shoot sense to them, almost sometimes more than being natural point guards. It's almost like great team decision making and who can play on or off the ball. And I think LaMelo is even more dynamic as a passer and shooter, obviously taking kind of more of a leap. But, the health is a big question for LaMelo, if that's going to hold up. But an inverted pick and roll with Brandon Miller and LaMelo Ball is pretty tough to guard. So that is
Oh yeah.
a fun action to keep an eye on. And one last team, you wrote about the Jazz a little bit. Obviously, Lauri Markkanen, star shooter, emerged with them. Will Hardy just breaking out all these sets, kind of treating them like a taller Klay Thompson, where the main
Yeah.
option, the primary option is just we're just going to get him open for movement threes all day. But
Yep.
somebody's got to be the second best player. So who do you think it'll be this year between Sexton or Kessler or maybe someone else pops?
Yeah, your guess is as good as mine. They have like a lot of young guys, that they're
Mm.
going to put into their rotation. Taylor Hendricks, Keontae George is obviously a guy who started for them a bunch of games last year. They still have the Jordan Clarkson question, and I imagine Jordan Clarkson is a guy who will be in trade talks at some point this year as a guy who can help off the bench for a contender. But you look at the rest of this roster, and it's like Bryce Sensabaugh is 20, Taylor Hendricks is 20, Isaiah Collier is 19, Kyle Filipowski is 20. Like these are, I forgot Cody Williams, their top pick this year, who's 20. Like there's so much young, and it goes back to the thing I mentioned about like how are you going to rebuild and what is the competency that you're going to provide for this team. Maybe Will Hardy is just like that good of a coach where you don't necessarily need those like veteran presence type of guys as much, but this is so much young talent on one team that I'm just not sure who's going to pop, to be honest with you. And that might determine their trajectory with Lowry over the next few years.
Exactly. I mean, they're all these teams could be eyeing the lottery as much as anything else, or these teams at the
Yeah.
end here, especially. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to peg a second best player. I would think Sexton kind of, if we're going scoring wise, is stepping
Sure.
up, and then Kessler has, really obviously proven himself as a rim protector, and shot blocking presence down low. So seemingly a natural fit with Markkanen there for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
And I might be mistaken, but is Patty Mills on the Utah Jazz this year?
He is. He is. So there you go. Veteran presence.
It's a Patty party down in Utah. Just bringing the FIBA Patty magic. Maybe work a little bit of that in, but you gotta love watching Patty Mills. So shout out to him. Still doing it, joining the Utah Jazz. But hey, I really want to thank you for taking the time today just to hop on the pod, talk a little Raptors, celebrate Vince a little. Shout out Vince, Hall of Famer, getting the jersey retired, well deserved, and congrats again on the big moves.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it. RK, as always, man, I appreciate hopping on. Good to chat with you, man.
You know it. Have a good one.
Peace.
With Ryan.
Learning Basketball is a Swish Theory podcast, hosted from Beyond the Arcade. Hey, that's me. You can find my work on Twitter, YouTube, Substack, and check out the team's website, theswishtheory.com.